Santiago, Chile. It is the morning of September 11th, 1973. Chilean fighter jets roar overhead. Palacio de la Moneda, the presidential palace, is under attack. In Washington, the CIA watches, and one man, William Colby, knows what is happening. Inside, Salvador Allende, the democratically elected president, refuses to flee. He puts on a helmet, picks up a rifle, and gives his final address on live radio.
En este momento definitivo, el último empezó para dirigirme a ustedes.
I will not resign, he says. I will pay with my life for the loyalty of the people. By midday, the palace is burning. Soon afterwards, Allende is dead and firemen carry out his body. This moment of democracy is over for Chile. But what role did the CIA play? And why, a year later, would its own director, William Colby, secretly testify to Congress about what really happened? Allende was no revolutionary firebrand. He was a doctor, a Democrat, and a moderate socialist. His government was called Popular Unity, a broad coalition of left and centre-left parties. His vision was simple: healthcare, education, housing. To achieve his goals, he redistributed land to the poor. He nationalised the copper mines, Chile's key source of wealth, previously controlled by US corporations. He raised wages. For the first time in Chile's history, the poor had a real voice in government. Not everyone welcomed this change. To Chile's business elite, Allende was a threat. To Washington, he represented a dangerous precedent. Allende's promise was to show that socialism was compatible with democracy. He was not a Soviet puppet. He was committed to democracy, and what was then an unprecedented experiment in peaceful socialism. Some in the West, such as President Nixon and his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, did not want this to be a success. They were focused on copper, trade, and above all, power. In 1974, CIA Director William Colby testified in secret to the House Armed Services Committee about what the US had done in Chile. That testimony was leaked to the New York Times, revealing for the first time that the US had tried to overthrow a democratically elected government. It was a moment of reckoning. By then, Colby had already embarrassed the CIA with his openness, and for years he would continue to do so. In 1975, President Ford replaced Colby as CIA Director with George H.W. Bush, somebody much better at keeping secrets. But Colby didn't stop. For decades he wrote books, gave interviews, appeared on TV and spoke candidly about the CIA's role in coups, assassinations and cover-ups, including Chile. In 1996, Colby gave a final in-depth interview to C-SPAN. He discussed decades of the CIA's ruthless work. Some thought that Colby had gone too far. His biographer John Prados later told how transcripts showed Kissinger fuming about Colby's airing of the CIA's dirty laundry. Colby had for sure made some important enemies. On April 27, 1996, Colby spent the day fixing up his sailboat at his weekend home in Maryland. Afterwards, he cooked a simple dinner of steamed clams and poured a glass of wine. He left the meal unfinished. He left the radio on and the lights burning. Then, as darkness fell, Colby supposedly got into his canoe and vanished into the night. The next day, a neighbour noticed that the canoe was missing and raised the alarm. Over the next 9 days, divers and helicopters scoured the area. They found the canoe, but not Colby. Then, suddenly, his dead body appeared on a stretch of riverbank that, strangely enough, had already been searched. Officials said it was probably a heart attack followed by drowning. But this was only a guess. Colby's body was too badly decomposed for the cause of death to be determined. How convenient, some might say. Former military intelligence officer and friend of Colby, Zaylen Grant, had worked with Colby during the Vietnam War. He conducted his own independent investigation. He was certain that Colby was murdered. Regarding the official story, he said, "I didn't believe that for 1 second." We may never know for sure. But one thing is clear. It was thanks to William Colby that the world learned the truth about US interference in Chile. We now know that the CIA had been active in Chile for decades before Allende. It had been working to undermine Allende since at least 1964. In 1970 they launched Project Fubelt. It was their latest covert plan aimed at bringing down Allende. Millions were poured into disinformation, media campaigns and bribery. Strikes were encouraged. Food distribution was disrupted. The Chilean economy was pushed into chaos. Nixon famously ordered the CIA, "Make the economy scream." A key ally was Chile's largest newspaper, El Mercurio, backed secretly by the CIA. It led the charge to paint Allende as a dictator in waiting. Meanwhile, the military was quietly preparing. The coup came in two phases. First, there was an attempt to prevent Allende from taking office after the election. General René Schneider, head of the army, stopped the coup, insisting that election results must be respected. For that, Schneider was murdered, ambushed by people connected to two CIA-backed generals, Roberto Vaux and Camilo Valenzuela. His death shocked the nation. But the plotters had failed. Allende became president. 3 years later, the second coup succeeded. On September 11th, 1973, the military moved in. Tanks surrounded the presidential palace. Hawker Hunter jets made by Britain bombed it from above. Inside, Allende refused to surrender. But he also refused to let his comrades die because of him. Hoping to end the bloodshed, he took his own life. General Augusto Pinochet then seized power. What followed was 17 years of terror. Tens of thousands were arrested. Teachers, students, union leaders. Stadiums became prisons. School became black sites where thousands were tortured. For years, the Chilean Navy's Esmeralda served as a floating jail and torture chamber. More than 3,000 people were executed or simply disappeared. Chile became a place of silence and terror. In the US, the media played down the coup. They reported economic recovery. They praised Pinochet for restoring order. It took years before the truth was widely known. Pinochet's regime wasn't just authoritarian, it was homicidal. Torture centres, censorship, fear. But US corporations were happy. Copper was back in private hands and markets were free. In Chile, people learned to whisper, to disappear, to wait. What if Allende had been left alone? Could Chile have offered a middle path between Soviet tyranny and capitalist greed? We will never know. Allende's experiment in popular unity died in flames beneath the roar of jet engines, the boots of generals, and at the hands of torturers. All this with the quiet backing of the USA. Today, Chile is rebuilding. Pinochet is gone. Allende is remembered as a man of integrity and courage, a leader who stood by his people to the end. In the West, many would prefer to forget this story. We remember 9/11, but not the one in 1973. We speak of democracy, but we forget the many times when we helped to destroy it. The truth is painful, but looking away is not neutral, it is consent. Quiet consent to corruption, torture, and murder. This was History in Bites. Thanks for watching.